what people need in order to feel more connected with wherever they work is to feel connected to their boss and to feel connected to their colleagues. It's more predictive of job happiness than where they work. Who they work with and who they work for is far more predictive. They will be interacting with these people actually for, on average, more hours than they'll speaking to their significant others. Approximately 90,000 hours of our lives will be spent at work. So having good connections at work is going to improve performance at work, affiliation, far lower likelihood of quiet quitting, attrition, and other things.
Welcome once again. It's Relationships at Work, your leadership guide to building workplace connections and avoiding blind spots. I'm your host, Russell Lolliker, host of this show. I'm a communications and leadership expert, a couple of decades under my belt in both those areas, a lot of success in them too. A whole heap of curiosity too, just like you, on how we can make the workplace better. One area that I think we really need to spend a lot more time on is the problem of loneliness for leaders. It seems to be a place many of us find ourselves, not intentionally. It just kind of happens. That lack of connection, that feeling of disengagement. I've recently talked about it in some of my solo episodes of the podcast about the impacts of feeling lonely and how it can really impact us from a disengagement standpoint. It's getting to be a huge problem, not just at work, but society as a whole. According to Gallup's State of the Global Workplace 2024 report, 1 in 5 employees, that's a lot of them, worldwide, this is not particularly one country over another, worldwide, they frequently felt lonely the previous day. So in the survey, they asked them, when is the most recent that you felt lonely? And a lot of them said yesterday. It was that recent for them. The rate is higher among employees that are under 35, about 22%, and among fully remote workers, 25%. And that's compared to the working on-site employees, which was about 16%. Loneliness at work is linked to a lot of bad stuff too. Increased risk of premature death, heart disease, stroke, a lot of health impacts compared to smoking or obesity. That's what they compare loneliness to. Obesity and smoking. It's also associated with higher stress, anxiety, depression, burnout. Bad stuff. Connection is what we need, whatever that looks like for each of us, and it is different for each of us. My guest today has made it a focus of his studies and his research in how we can find that connection in our lives, in work or outside of work, in an effort to combat that loneliness. Let's find our way back to connection, shall we? Hold on. On the show today, we have Dr. Adam Dorsay, and here is why he is awesome. He's a licensed psychologist, keynote speaker, two-time TEDx speaker, certified executive coach, a resiliency expert who's created company programs for organizations like Facebook and DigitalOcean. He's a fellow podcaster hosting the Share Care award-winning psychology podcast called Super Psyched. And he's an award-winning author. He's got a new book, Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love. The man also loves alliteration, apparently, and he's here. Hello, Adam.
Russell, it's great to be with you, man. And I got to tell you, you are amazing. What a voice, and one of the best intros I've heard.
Very kind, sir. I'll try to keep the questions not too hard hitting. You've sucked up the perfect amount, so I appreciate that immensely.
I trust.
Before we get into this really interesting topic of leadership loneliness and connection, I have to ask the question I ask all my guests, Adam, which is, what is your best or worst employee experience?
Well, here's a funny one for you. I had a boss who I referred to as not my mentor, but my tormentor. It's rather funny to add that his successor was literally my mentor, but this guy was my mentor. Imagine Devil Wears Prada, just a dude and just mean. He told me at the time that it was an after-school learning program that I was working for, and he told me that when I ran this place and I was taking it over from a previous instructor, that I would lose at minimum 50% of the student population, and I would struggle to bring it back to where it had been previously. Okay. Well, not only did I not lose a single student, but I actually brought it up by 17. I brought it up by about 60%. And the only thing he could say, and it was very instructive to me, was, Adam, you didn't perform as poorly as I imagined. That was maybe the kindest thing he said to me during our time together. So from that, I learned and I studied a lot about positive psychology and how we really do better when we are properly shepherded. So immediately his successor takes over and props me up and gives me a sense of who I could be. And with the former boss, I was constantly playing defense and not taking any risks. And with my mentor, who was a fellow by the name of Martin, who I just think about every day, he allowed me to take chances. He allowed me to be more of a Steph Curry, so to speak. He allowed me to take shots and miss and know that the next shot I took, maybe I'd hit it. And so I think about Martin, who was legitimately the best boss I ever had. And I miss him every day. He sadly has passed. And I write about him extensively in my book, and I think about him all the time. Not a single day goes by that I don't think about Martin, but it just really speaks to the power of words. The notion of sticks and stones may break my bones, but, names or words will never hurt me. That's not true. Words can really heal. Words can really harm. And I had two bosses, one after the other, who showed me firsthand what could happen if I was under the tutelage of somebody truly great.
Do you think, I always try to think leaders aren't trying to be horrible, even when they are. Like, was his approach trying to be like ass backwards motivation? Was it that I don't think you'll reach this, so I'm going to give him the opposite and try to motivate him to prove me wrong? Was that his thinking?
I never sat him on the couch because that would have been inappropriate for a whole host of reasons. But here's the thing. It's my contention that he came upon this honestly. He was not a bad person. He was very misguided, as so many are. And he believed kind of the idea of don't give him an inch, he'll ask for a mile, and feed him crumbs and maybe you'll get a whole bunch of good stuff. I believe that was what he believed. Martin, on the other hand, really believed in he was, if you're familiar, I don't know if Johnny Appleseed made his way to Canada, but he was a guy okay, cool. He was more of a Johnny Appleseed. He was a guy who just said, let's spread good stuff and more good stuff will happen. And Martin acted as a template for, it was really funny. Martin, you and I were talking offline about Conan and Norm Macdonald, and David Letterman had famously a top 10 list. And Martin sat us down and said, listen, tomorrow we will be meeting and I'm going to give you my top 10 list of the things I expect from the people who report from me. And I want to see your top 10 list of the things you expect from your boss.
Beautiful.
Oh, totally mind blowing. And I was really a little kind of tentative as I was writing out my top 10 list because I didn't want to say something that might ruffle his feathers. But Martin was the kind of guy who was so strong in every which way that he did not have a fragile ego. He really believed in his people. He led with trust. He saw people for their strengths. He didn't expect somebody who was strong with analytics, but poor with people to become great with people. He would really just say, you know what, we're going to keep you as the Spock on the starship. And for the person who was really good with people, well, we're going to we'll grow you where you're strong.
Love that. Because unfortunately, that's an anomaly, not the regular sort of life we live in the leadership ecosystem. But we're working to change that, Adam. This is why we do what we do. So let's talk about, I'm trying to be positive. Look at me still.
100%, Russell. And just to follow, just to go where you were kind of beginning to go is, there's no question in my mind that I'm better for having both experiences. Yeah. And so I'm grateful for both. I can't say I was grateful in the moment that I was working for the other guy, but I learned a ton. And I'm all the more grateful for having had Martin because I learned 5x or more. Let's say 100x or more what I learned from the other guy, but I definitely learned from the other guy.
Well, I think there's a few things we can take from Martin, from your demonstration of that. And I think one of the things is what we're going to talk about today, which is really connection and avoiding leadership loneliness.
Good point.
We get into these positions We are put in leadership positions a lot of the time because, to the point we've been talking about, ill-prepared, untrained, feeling like we're an other when we have to take over a team. There's a lot of challenges that new leaders have to deal with. And before we really dig into this, I need to sort of set the table, which I really enjoy doing on the show, which is I want you, Adam, to define what you even mean when you talk about loneliness and you talk about connection.
So it's a really great question, Russell, because the word connection, if you look it up in any authoritative dictionary, will basically describe the linkage of two things. And when people say, I'm really longing for connection, that's not what they're talking about. So part of my job when I wrote this book on connection, and it was the byproduct of the fact that so many people on my podcast and virtually everyone in my office kept talking about this word, this nebulous term called connection, which the opposite of which, disconnection, is described extensively in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is our Bible for diagnoses in mental health. Most of the diagnoses have some element of disconnection involved with them. A hallmark of depression is disconnecting from the present because we're ruminating about the past. That is one of the attributes of depression. And an attribute of anxiety could be not connecting with the present because we're worried about the future. An attribute of trauma is dissociation or perhaps depersonalization, and serious mental illness like psychosis is a break from reality itself. So if at the heart of everything we don't want is disconnection, it seemed logical to me that we should really do a deep dive into what does connection mean, because we're not looking at the word connection when somebody says, I'm looking for more connection in my life, the linkage of two things. Funny enough, when I looked for an authoritative American Psychological Association definition of the word connection, it didn't exist. There's no word for connection. That's an oddity. The best definition I found was through Psych Central, which was a kind of a maybe hit about 10% of what I believe people meant. So what I did was I actually rallied 10 licensed mental health professionals to help me come up with a working definition of the word connection. That was the starting point. What does this even mean? And how could it be a salve against loneliness? And what is loneliness in and of itself? So connection, according to me and the other nearly 10 other people, the working definition was something that causes you to come alive. It's vitality. It is life force. It's an emotional response, and it's a full body response. I'm just going to ask you, Russell.
Sure.
I remember hearing Stairway to Heaven for the very first time in my life. Nobody needed to explain to me that this was a good song. Like, my body knew it. Can you think of a time that you really came alive? It could have been music, could have been going to a place, could have been meeting a person, seeing a live performance. What's something that really brought you alive?
Well, funny, Adam, because I mean, the minute you thought of Stairway to Heaven, I'm like, I was a sock hop in grade 11 or something or other. I can't believe I said the word sock
hop.
Wow. It was like this is really making me very Canadian. Much Music Dance Party was a big thing back in high school where these touring DJs would do this music. But you hit that right song and you're like at a concert or something and you're just like, yes, like this, you come alive because you feel that connection, for lack of a better term, because it hits back to a memory or it's hitting that rhythm that certain tempos of songs hit that make you feel something. There's a science to that. As much better than I do. So I think for me, maybe I'm not picking one thing, but I am, because you brought up music. That's where my brain's going right now. I completely get that feeling right now.
Life force. So
yeah.
In that moment, I'm guessing you felt almost like in some ways connected to the force, connected to the planet, connected to the universe. And one of the things that happens is we are born alone. And according to most thinkers, we die alone. And we can go through life feeling very much alone. And it doesn't matter if you're in the most populated place in the world. You can be in Tokyo and still feel very lonely. People might say, well, you're surrounded by people. Well, being surrounded by people does not necessarily mean that you feel a connection. You could be in a relationship with a gorgeous individual and still feel very much alone because you don't feel attuned to in any way, shape, or form. So clearly the presence of another is not sufficient. Now, paradoxically, you might also be able to describe a time that you were out in nature walking alone and somehow felt connected in the midst of solitude. Now, I want to contradict loneliness from solitude. Solitude is something we choose. Loneliness is something none of us would choose. Loneliness is that feeling that no one gets me. I feel so alone in this life. I don't feel anybody else grokking with me, getting me, understanding me, feeling me. And there's this fancy highfalutin term that I absolutely adore that comes from a guy by the name of Dan Siegel, a neuropsychiatrist out of UCLA. It's called interpersonal neurobiology. And the bottom line is it's feeling felt. Do you feel felt? And so when somebody says, hey man, you feel me? That's what we're talking about. Do you feel felt? And when you're in the company of somebody, you could feel very much alone if you don't feel felt. You and I, the second you and I started talking, I mean, we were talking about Norm Macdonald. We were talking about really cool experiences that we've had. You and I just immediately there was in a live repartee as if we were George and Jerry at a deli for Seinfeld. It was amazing. And that's not a guarantee. You're not going to feel that with everybody you talk to. But that is what we mean by connection. And its opposite is definitely feeling disconnected or lonely. And one of the things we know about loneliness, by the way, is it's no joke. England has hired a health minister who is the minister of loneliness, trying to help people realize how they could feel more connected. Our own Surgeon General from the last administration, who I loved very much, his name was Vivek Murthy. Dr. Vivek Murthy said that loneliness is, and he substantiated this with research that came out of Utah, that is dangerous to our physical health as 15 cigarettes per day. The Cambridge study, which you're probably familiar with, has shown that feeling connected with other people, feeling a strong connection, is probably going to be one of the most healthful things that we could possibly have. It's a bigger, and its opposite is a bigger predictor of mortality than almost any cardiological measure.
How have you seen it pervasive in the workplace? Because, I mean, you've gone into organizations and certainly helped them with their challenges. So what are we trying to fix here?
Man, that is such a great question and so intuitive on your part. So one of the things that can happen at work is that people don't know how to craft a conversation, A, and B, how to craft a conversation that is also appropriate for work. So they've got two things going against them. Let's say that they're in the techie area. So maybe, once again, analysis is their thing, but people might be something that they aren't particularly organically skilled at. And what people need in order to feel more connected with wherever they work, is to feel connected to their boss and to feel connected to their colleagues. It's more predictive of job happiness than where they work. Who they work with and who they work for is far more predictive. They will be interacting with these people actually for, on average, more hours than they'll speaking to their significant others. Approximately 90,000 hours of our lives will be spent at work. So having good connections at work is going to improve performance at work, affiliation, far lower likelihood of quiet quitting, attrition, and other things. So some very smart companies have taken note and tried to find ways to make people feel a stronger affiliation to their place of work. And yet, what do I hear about in my office all the time? I mean, the top two things are love and work. I hear about struggling with my significant other and struggling with my work, generally my boss. Oftentimes people will tell me stories about bosses horrible bosses, which is a great movie, and I'm sure you've seen it, starring Jason Bateman and some others. I mean, some of these things that transpire in that movie seem otherworldly, and yet I hear about such horrors in my office that make me almost jump out of my chair. And I so badly wish that I could just, as a part of me, my knee jerk is to shake those bosses by their lapels. But of course, I would love to basically be able to have a conversation, metaphorically speaking, not physically and literally. But I would love to be able to, just give a workshop, a long-term workshop for the bosses who believe, kind of like that boss who I was describing, believe that they will get the most out of their employees by being jerks. That's not how it works. That is not how humans work. I don't care what, there have been some lionized coaches in sports, who I'm not going to name, but there have been who are jerky. They tend to be college coaches. They tend to have very short lifespans with their athletes versus I'm just going to use a great coach by comparison who's been on my own podcast. I had the blessing of interviewing Steve Kerr, who I consider one of the kindest men I've ever spoken to in my entire life, who cited the 4 core values of joy, competition, mindfulness, and compassion as being his core values that leads teams to victories, unless they, of course, play the Toronto Raptors, damn it, in 2019, which I'm still sore about, that Kawhi Leonard last bouncing. I'm sure everybody in Canada rejoiced. But irrespective of that moment, Steve Kerr has 9 rings. 9 rings. Proof that nice guys can win. And not only that, but his players love playing for him. Mm-hmm. Some people say it's better to be feared than to be liked. I disagree. I say it's better to be respected and liked. Let's not bring fear into it. Fear does not bring out the best in people.
But I'm guessing this is a spectrum, because when we talk connection, people might think networking. People might think, oh, we're friends on Facebook or we're best friends drinking after work, right? Oh. So when it comes from somebody that's lonely in their organization, what are they looking for when it comes to connection? Because it's not a light switch. It's not you're now connected, you're not connected. It feels like there's a bit more to it.
There are such grades of connection. I love what Lori Santos out of the Yale Happiness Lab says. She says that social media and hitting a thumbs up and a like is basically the NutraSweet of connection. And I agree 1,000,000%. It's not. It's nothing. It has no half-life. It's mildly meaningful, but very much not. Versus even just having a connection with somebody, what I'm going to call a micro connection with somebody at line at a grocery store, or even the person who's checking you out. I don't know if you have Trader Joe's up there in Canada, but it's one of the great food store chains. It's fantastic. And for some reason, like whatever they figured out, they figured it out. They know how to do things well. I actually even interviewed the guy who I interviewed on my podcast on how to flirt well is a Trader Joe's employee. And having a micro connection, even with the person who's checking you out, can have a half-life far greater than a like on a social media. Too many people say, I'm too busy for friendships. And one of the things that Esther Perel reminds us, she's one of the great, if you're not familiar with her work, and you get familiar with her work, like I'm saying this to the listeners, not to you, Russell, but to those who aren't familiar with Esther Perel, she is a giant. And I'm not talking about her height. I'm talking about her intellectual prowess and her contribution to our knowledge of what relationships are. She says that it wasn't very long ago that we used to live in villages. And now we expect our significant other to play all of the roles of all of the people in the village. We need friends. No significant other can fill all of those roles. My wife, I was mentioning basketball. I have a long history of football and baseball. I'm new to basketball only since my children came into the world. And it's absolutely by far my favorite sport now. Like, just there's nothing I would rather watch. I mean, I hold Chase Center as like a temple, but my wife isn't going to watch it with me, and I wouldn't want her to watch it with me because she won't care. And you can feel, I'm sure you've sat with somebody who was just super not into something you were super into.
Happens to movies all the time.
Exactly. And you can feel it. You can feel it. And my father, who's a super opera fan, like part of his connection, I call it a connection formula. Part of his connection formula is going to long, long operas. I can totally do a 2 or 3 hour opera, no problem, and enjoy it. But put me in a 6-hour Wagnerian opera, and it's going to be a very expensive place for me to sleep. And my father probably wouldn't want to drag me there. He'd be far better dragging or bringing joyfully somebody who's into that kind of thing. So I want to have a great marriage, and I do. I'm 23 years in, and I still feel like in my first week of dating her, she's a needle in a haystack. I don't know how I found her. Every day with her, she knows how much I adore her. I do believe that what we appreciates, and she is just sparkling. I absolutely adore her, and I'm not going to watch basketball with her, nor will I watch Lord of the Rings with her. She does not like Lord of the Rings. I adore Lord of the Rings. I need other people to do things with in my life. And thankfully, I have those people. Similarly, she would not take me to an improv dance workshop. I would want to stay in the car in fetal position the entire time. And that would be far better than probably doing an improv dance workshop. At some point, I hope to grow into that. But she's also into all day bluegrass music festivals. I can do 2 hours of that. But all day out in the cold, no thanks. So she has friends for that too. So we both have friends. And it really is key to our marriage that we know the things that we're going to be really into. We're going to the Sphere next month to see Dead and Company, and we're both going to be just absolutely out of our minds stoked to be there. We have our things that we do together that are just phenomenal.
I think it's important to recognize the connection is something we can have outside of work to bring into work, but it also shows as a contrast too of, well, I can have amazing connection outside of work, but I can't seem to have connection inside of work. So it can also be a measuring stick of what you're not doing or not getting versus what you are getting. So I want to turn back to something you talk about in your book, which is really, and it's something I talk about a lot on the show, which is around the relationship with self. And you mentioned about self-connection being super, super important, and that maybe the lack of self-connection could contribute to loneliness. Is that true?
Can you imagine how bad it feels if you don't know who you are or what you're feeling? There is a term, another highfalutin term in psychology called alexithymia, and I'll break it down so you can say it at your next
dinner
party. You got it.
Sure.
So alexithymia, the absence of lexi, words, thymia, feeling, the inability to put our feelings into words. This is something that many of us experience. I know I'm feeling something, but I don't know what it is, and I just know it doesn't feel good. And that is a form of loneliness from ourselves. Why do we end up in perhaps less than optimal relationships? Well, because we don't know who we are. We don't know what we're looking for. I said that at the nucleus of connection, and I consider it kind of almost like, if you can imagine an archery target with 4 circles, how we connect with ourselves is the bullseye. It is the connection that informs all the other connections. It's not self-absorbed to need to know who you are and to connect with yourself any more than it would be to say, you know what, before I go on that long bike ride, I need to go to the bathroom. I need to go pee before I go on that 50-mile ride. What happens 10 miles into the ride when all you're going to be thinking about is needing to go pee? You need to take care of yourself first. As stupid as that sounds and as base as that sounds, but we need to take care of ourselves first before we take care of the other connections. And the 4th realm is connecting with something greater. Now, connecting with something greater to the religious folk means connecting with their religion. But even an Orthodox atheist would acknowledge that if they are in a beautiful space, they will feel awe. They might see the sunset. They might see a beautiful tree. They might be someplace like Banff at Lake Louise. You can tell I'm making this very Canada-centric because I absolutely adore your country and have spent time there. Some people might prefer a very different look, but you're probably going to experience some modicum of awe. Let's throw out a bunch of different looking places. Stonehenge, Grand Canyon, the Caribbean. There are just a whole bunch of places that are awe-inspiring. What we know about awe, by the way, which is the 4th layer, that's kind of connecting to something greater. Even the most hardcore, ardent atheist will feel that experience. The cool thing about awe, which has been put under the microscope, I get really geeky around this, is that awe actually makes us into better people. We are far more pro-social. We're less likely to be self-absorbed. If you put somebody into a neuroimaging situation, like some type of a brain scan, while they're experiencing awe, the same receptors in the brain light up when we have psilocybin in our systems, which is the psychoactive chemical in magic mushrooms. So you don't need to take any illegal substances that could be dangerous in order to feel that feeling of pro-social awe. And I say pro-social awe because awe does make us far more social.
Hey, if you're enjoying the insights from our guests, you'll love our Raw Notes newsletter. It's packed with guest takeaways, the resources that inspire them, and my own tips on how we as leaders can be better humans for the humans that we're responsible for. Go to relationshipsatworkshow.com and subscribe now and help the workplace be more human. But we don't always start from the same place, Adam. So what I'm thinking is, I hear what you're talking about, the four areas to focus on. Totally get that. But there are a lot of people that might need to do some work on themselves to be open to those kind of connections. Past trauma can certainly inform them. Diversity, where they were raised. How do we make it personal to us based on our own struggles and challenges to even be ready to be able to connect?
We are all in our own starting place. Inasmuch as a marathon runner and let's say I was training for a marathon, I would not be in the same place as a seasoned marathon runner. I'd need to start where I was. And I wouldn't want to look at the person next to me and compare myself to them. I'd want to say, where am I today? And where do I hope to be tomorrow? And where was I yesterday? So some of us we all come in with varying baselines. We all come in with varying individual differences. In as much as we have similarities between humans, all 8 billion of us are very different. All of us have subjective realities. Can't understand how somebody wouldn't like chocolate, but there are people on this planet who thinks chocolate is disgusting. To me, it's unfathomable. And yet, I need to recognize that is also a truth. But to your point, some of us come in with neuro differences. Some of us come in with traumas and various diagnoses that may hinder our abilities to connect. That doesn't mean that we don't want to connect. Mm-hmm. It just might mean that our formula for connection at this given time might be different. So go to a dance party. Some people are just rocking out. Just the music couldn't be loud enough. They couldn't be having a more full body experience. Other people are saying, I hate this music. Other people are saying, it's too loud. Other people are saying, I want to be here with all of these people, but I want to wear headphones. And so some people who have kind of STEM related issues might want to be wearing headphones, but still might want to be there. Some people might say, no, my God, I'm an introvert. Being around all of these people is terrifying. I'm about to have a panic attack. So what we need to do is be patient with ourselves and figure out what it is that we like and not hold ourselves up to the standards of someone else. It was really funny. It's funny that I'm quoting this individual, but he said something so brilliant, I can't not quote him. But Rob Lowe said to his son as he was dropping him off in college, I believe this is not apocryphal, I believe this is what he said, don't judge your insides by someone else's outside.
Right.
And how people are showing up. I mean, I remember, as I was mentioning, walking through high school, I come from the Breakfast Club generation, which just apparently had its 40th anniversary. And that line from Simple Minds, Vanity and Security, just like walking through the halls of high school, I was positive that everyone had it more together than I did. And only at my 20th high school reunion did I find out that everyone was in their own thing. Everyone had something. Someone had an alcoholic father, somebody's mom was abusing them, just fill in the blank. Everybody was walking around with their own burdens. That Buddhist notion of be kind for everyone is, I'm saying it poorly, but is carrying a burden of their own. Everyone has something. Nobody has nothing. And we tend to imagine that we are the only ones, and we feel shame as a result. And I'm so grateful to people like Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer who are promoting awareness around what is one of the selves, and that is self-compassion. Self-compassion, which is talking to ourselves like fostering an inner Ted Lasso voice. Turns out like saying, hey buddy, to yourself, you're struggling right now, you got this, hang in there. Or do you need a little time out? What, you need a little break? And there are 3 basic roads, and of course there are entire weekend workshops devoted to what I'm going to just say very quickly, but speaking to yourself the way a friend would speak to you. We need to cultivate that voice. That was what Martin did so well as my boss. Recognizing that all of us are struggling, that life brings with it some form of pain to everyone. And that we're not alone in this. We're part of the human experience. And the third way is being mindful, which sounds really woo, but it's basically being aware of what's going on while it's going on, not making it bigger or smaller than it is, Just saying, okay, wow, yeah, I'm noticing that I'm feeling a little bit anxious here as I go to this rave. Do I want to go? And what is this anxiety telling me? In some cases, it means I'm about to have a panic attack. I shouldn't go. In some cases, it means I need to still push through and go beyond the anxiety and expose myself to this thing. So it's highly variable, but the important thing is that we respect ourselves as we go through our attempts to connect.
But connection involves more than one person. And so that's why I'm transitioning from understanding we're doing the work. We're absolutely doing the work, and we're understanding us. We're understanding and defining what connection means to us based on numerous things you've mentioned here. But we're also talking about vulnerability and authenticity. You talk about that quite a bit in your book. I can think of some leaders that the minute we start going down that path, they'll be like, but I'll lose credibility in the workplace if I'm too vulnerable, if I'm too heart-centric, too authentic, I guess, I'll bring my full self. So I have to bring that barrier. What do you say to somebody that's looking for connection, but it also is trying to be not too familiar, not too friendly with making it look unprofessional?
So I would say that actually connection does not necessarily involve two people. As I was saying before, it really can involve just us talking to us. Right. And that really informs all of the others. There's this great internal family systems couple therapist who came up with a concept called intimacy from the inside out. And her basic premise, and she's been on my podcast, she's featured in my book, and she's fabulous. She talks about the idea that we can only be as kind to the other as we are kind to ourselves. So I would actually say really solidifying a relationship with ourselves before we get out there. That's one of the reasons why in Major League Baseball, one of the things, and I've never seen the stats on this, but if every home team player who's about to show up at bat uses this, it must work. But everybody has a different walk-on song. So the leadoff hitter shows up and he's playing a country western song. The next guy shows up with reggaeton. The next guy kind of shows up with hip hop. And then the fourth guy shows up with some kind of classic rock. Each of them needs to have their soundtrack. And I'm using this as a metaphor and an external reality. Each of us needs to walk through life with the soundtrack that matters to us and brings out our best before we start talking to other people at work. So when we wake up in the morning, each of us has a different suiting up routine. I've had different songs for my pump up songs, but right now I'm kind of really vibing to Lil Nas X and Industry Baby. I just love that song. It just gets me pumped. But I don't doubt that there will be another song that shows up for me pretty soon because I love music so much. But each of us needs to do that before. And then when each of us has different levels of comfort with how much self-disclosure we engage in at work, I've made a decision. I was trained in the psychoanalytic tradition initially to not self-disclose anything. And I was working with some gang-affiliated youth. And I remember I came to a cross in the roads and it was like, There was a moment where one of the guys said something so incredibly funny, and I could give the tabula rasa, I could give kind of the still face, or I could be real. And I remember signing on to be real. And I never looked back. Because I noticed that what happened was the rapport that I developed. First of all, it's who I am. It's this whole tabula rasa thing was not, my nickname is Enthusiasm. Come on, how long was this? I'm glad I was trained in it. I'm glad I learned that I could do it, but this is not how I roll. And secondly, I learned that some self-disclosure, judicious use of self-disclosure, when it's in the client's best interest, can be very therapeutic. And I also know some therapists, and I respect them, who choose not to do that. So it's really a personal choice, similarly in any place of work. But I would ask people to engage in what we refer to in my biz as cognitive flexibility. Try to stretch yourself. A colleague of mine who says, I'm not a shrink, I'm a stretch. And I agree, I'm a stretch. I'm more of a stretch than a shrink. I don't know. I think shrink actually probably has its roots from like witch doctors and shrinking heads from some type of tribes that that white people at some point decided was like something that we could call psychotherapy. And to me, it seems pejorative. But I am a stretch, and I do believe in that within this lifetime, it's all opportunities for growth. Some people say AVCO, another effing growth opportunity, but let's engage in those. Let's actually embrace the growth opportunities. Let's see if there's more that we can bring to ourselves, and if there are more skills that we can bring to the fore as we aim to be courageous at work. And sometimes that means being more self-disclosive or more interpersonal at work, whatever it might mean, but see if we can grow more of ourselves rather than just be static.
Is there something we should be looking for as leaders in our own teams to, I guess, maybe note loneliness of the team? I mean, you're doing the work, but not everybody knows that approach or is focusing on themselves as well. And they're coming to work lonely. Even in a team of 5, 10, 15, 20, they're feeling like an other. As a leader, how do you connect with those people who are struggling?
It really depends. And I know that's not a really great one. Some people would prefer just to say to the group, hey, I see y'all. Sometimes it means pulling somebody aside and say, let's go grab a coffee. Let's go for a walk and talk, whatever it might be. What's up? Let's talk about what's up. And it might take a little time for the rather timid person who's reporting to the boss to actually disclose anything, because they might worry that their job might be on the line. Vulnerability is terrifying. But one of the antidotes to vulnerability is intimacy. And it was really funny. Just today, I was speaking to an intimacy expert, and I'm just going to share this with you because it was so interesting what he said. He said intimacy is vulnerability met well. I needed to look that up. Intimacy is vulnerability met well. And one of the things that you and I both know is that, Russell, come on, in the green room, when you and I were talking, for the sake of your listeners, if you and I just kind of stayed, well, it seems to me, blah, blah, blah. I mean, people would say next, and I don't want to listen to this damn podcast. This is stupid. There's no vitality here. But each of us was a little vulnerable in some way in our green room conversation. And as a net result, you and I are having a far more dynamic conversation. I know that you're a cool person. Seriously, I do. I have evidence to support this notion that you are actually a cool individual. And hopefully it's reciprocal. But there seemed, unless I'm completely fooling myself, it seems like there is some reciprocity in that notion.
We're good, Adam. We're good.
I wasn't too concerned.
No, we're good.
But what I'm driving at is, it doesn't matter what the context of the relationship is. There needs to be some kind of leaning toward each other. And I love that idea of vulnerability met well. Intimacy does not mean some type of eroticism. It means that we can be more frank with each other. Eroticism means eroticism.
Sure.
Intimacy does not. You can have a very intimate but very non-erotic relationship. It was really funny. I was listening to Conan and Jordan engaging in a conversation, and Jordan actually got something right. I don't know if you're familiar with their dynamic, but Jordan and Conan is just like one of the funniest dyads in history. You can't write this stuff. It's not even written. It's just who they are. But Jordan said that he and Conan have a very intimate relationship. And Conan said, what are you talking about? We don't have an intimate relationship. And I understood what Conan was talking about. And in common parlance, we think of that as an erotic or a romantic relationship in the traditional place that it's kind of usually done with a significant other. But actually having an intimate relationship could mean that you are actually able to utter certain things to this individual that you wouldn't be able to someone else. A private conversation that is being willing to share something. It's vulnerability met well. Whereas eroticism, that's a whole other issue and probably should not be happening in the workplace.
Is there a role beyond us as leaders and our teams in addressing loneliness from an organizational standpoint? I'm thinking executive, HR, I don't know, C-suite, middle managers. Is there a way to, or what would you recommend for a culture that would foster a little less loneliness and a lot more connection?
Yeah, I would recommend conversation starters and icebreakers that are big talk questions. One of my great guests was a woman by the name of Kalina Silverman, and she was a Northwestern student, and she was just so tired of small talk. And if you were a fly on the wall in most work situations, it's a lot of small talk, safe talk about tech, about politics, sports, nothing real. And I would not immediately go in with like big questions, like big existential questions. What do you want to do before you die? That's a very good question, by the way, but might not be the greatest question to ask as kind of an opener. You'd probably want to build up to that, but there are ways to titrate your questions so that they begin to increase in intensity over time, so that you can go beyond. I have no problem about talking about tech. I have no problem talking about sports. As you can tell, I love talking about sports, and I love talking about tech, and I don't love talking about politics too much, but that's just me, although I know some people who just love it. But I don't think that people necessarily become much closer as a result of doing those things. But talking about things we really love, talking about like when you and I talked about having an experience that caused us to come alive, those are the types of things I would want to talk about. Someone brilliant once said, it would be my recommendation that people find ways to increase the levels of aliveness in their questions. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, where are you from? What brought you to town? I was just out of town, and had that type of conversation with people. And in some cases it built, in some cases it didn't. It's almost dogs meeting each other at the park and sniffing each other out. And you got to start with the small questions. But eventually, if there's a there, we're going to want to engage in that vulnerability met well. Let's talk about something a little bit bigger. Again, it's a step-by-step approach. It's not usually done in a massive leap. Tell me all of your long-lost secrets. Like, that would be a terrible thing to ask in a work environment.
So let's wrap it up with the last question. I kind of want to know is so say I'm a leader and I'm feeling lonely, or I'm seeing other people that are lonely. What do you feel are the first or any baby steps to start that process for ourselves or for others to start going down that path of building connection? What would you recommend somebody to even just start tomorrow if they didn't know where to?
One of the things that can be really useful, especially given that some people are more introverted on the spectrum and others are more extroverted. Introverts need time to think. I'm so grateful to Susan Cain, who's really brought so much of the intelligence towards how to support introverts. In the United States, extroversion seems to weigh more than introversion, but in certain countries like Japan, where I formerly lived, introversion is king. Certainly Scandinavian countries and other places as well. But introverts need time to think about what they will share. So one thing that a leader might do is say, we're going to be meeting next week. Nobody, you can pass on answering this question, but here's a question that I want you guys to think about. Tell us about a time in nature. I'm not making this one up. Tell us about a time in nature where you just were having a blast. That's a pretty easy one to answer. It's not super self-disclosing. Could be a very short answer. It could be somebody says, I was out in the redwoods and it was beautiful and I heard the sounds of birds. Someone else might say something really way more intense. I'd just been to a funeral and being out in nature really caused me to feel more alive and recognize the preciousness of life. But we're far more likely to feel connected to each other if we have more data than just what the other people are wearing and the limited information that's being imparted. I mean, that's part of one of the reasons why, some people, have tattoos for very personal reasons and don't want to be asked about them. But I think that many people, when they get tattoos, want those tattoos, especially if they're visible while wearing clothing, say on someone's fingers. And some people may want them to be seen. And whenever I've been able to see someone's tattoo, by the way, in a clinical situation, I've always asked, hey, I see the tattoo. What does it mean to you? And they never once has anyone ever said decline. they've always wanted to share, whether it was a mistake. Oh, I really regret having gotten this tattoo versus this tattoo means the world to me and it informs so many of my decisions. And but having more data about each other that will not be used against the other person, but is only used to connect and to feel more affiliated. Well, that's a good thing. And it's not guaranteed. Of course, once it's out there, it could be used against the person. But I'm going to stick with what I learned this morning, and that is vulnerability met well.
That is Dr. Adam Dorsay. He is a licensed psychologist, keynote speaker, 2-time TEDx speaker, executive coach, and he's got himself a new book. Super psyched. Unleash the power of the 4 types of connections and live the life you love. Thank you so much for being here, Adam.
Russell, it was a blast.
Thank you once again for joining us. That is Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to building workplace connections and avoiding blind spots. I'm Russell, always happy to be here with you. I hope you got some value out of that. I know you did. Talking about connection, I think, is something that we think is woo-woo or soft, but what's the option? What's the other choice in the workplace? Disconnection? How do we expect our employees to be motivated, to be inspired, to innovate, to be creative, to build better, to serve better, if they don't feel connected to the people around them, to the mission, the goal, the vision, the work? I think this is one of the biggest things we as leaders need to prioritize. So big thanks to Dr. Adam Dorsay for being here. If you find this episode useful, helpful, I'd recommend it to somebody else. Just whether it's somebody you pass in the hall at work or somebody you know who loves podcasts and might want another leadership podcast to really sink their teeth into, or maybe they're not listening to leadership podcasts and this will be their first one. Either or, if you find some value, please share the love. That's it. That's all. We're done. Take care of yourself.